The courtroom was heavy with silence. The kind of silence that makes the air feel thick, pressing against your chest. Reporters filled every bench, cameras ready. Microphones pointed toward the center of the storm. A wealthy man with everything to lose, and a poor maid with nothing left to fight for except the truth. At the front of the courtroom stood Grace Carter, trembling, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her uniform was plain and worn, her eyes red from sleepless nights and tears. She looked so small under the towering marble columns and the giant seal of justice behind the judge's bench. On the other side sat Richard Blake, a billionaire whose name echoed through New York's business world. His black suit was perfectly pressed, his gold watch gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But his expression was ice cold, a face carved from anger and pride. Next to him sat his little daughter Emily, just 7 years old, clutching a teddy bear with button eyes. Everyone in the room whispered the same question: how could a woman like her hurt a child like that? When the judge entered, the room stood. The bailiff called out, "All rise," and the trial began. Richard stood first, his voice calm but sharp. "Your Honor," he said, "the evidence speaks for itself. My daughter was beaten. The bruises on her arm, the marks on her neck, all from this woman. I trusted her in my home, and she betrayed that trust. I want justice." He turned his piercing gaze toward Grace. "You were supposed to protect my little girl, not harm her." Gasps filled the room. A woman in the audience shook her head. A man whispered, "She looks guilty." But Grace's lips quivered as she tried to speak. Her voice was soft, trembling, almost lost in the courtroom's echo. "Sir, I didn't hurt Emily. I love her like she's my own. I would never—" Her voice broke. The judge, Honorable David Monroe, raised a hand. "Mrs. Carter, please remain calm. You'll have your turn to explain." Grace nodded weakly, wiping her tears. The prosecutor stood up, a young, confident man with slicked-back hair. He walked slowly around Grace like a hunter circling its prey. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the jury, "this is a case about betrayal. About a woman who was given everything, food, shelter, a job, and who repaid that kindness with violence. The bruises on the child's arm are proof. The timeline matches. The only adult in the home that evening was the defendant. This was not an accident. It was an assault." He slammed a photo onto the table, a picture of Emily's small arm covered in purple bruises. The crowd gasped again. Grace flinched as if she'd been struck herself. But then her attorney, Sarah Miller, stood. She was a quiet woman, not flashy or loud, but her voice carried calm strength. "Your Honor," she said, "before this court condemns an innocent woman, we should remember, not everything that glitters is gold. Appearances can deceive and money can blind." Richard frowned, his jaw tightening. Sarah continued, "Grace Carter has worked for the Blake family for 3 years. Not once has there been a complaint against her. She has raised this little girl with love, devotion, and care. The truth, Your Honor, is not what it seems." The judge leaned back in his chair. "We will let the child speak," he said gravely. "Her words may reveal what really happened." All eyes turned to Emily. The small girl shifted nervously in her chair, holding her teddy bear even tighter. Her eyes darted between her father and Grace, the two people she loved in very different ways. Richard bent down and whispered something to her. The little girl nodded slightly, her lips trembling. "Emily," the judge said softly, "can you tell us what happened that night?" The courtroom went completely still. Not even the reporters dared to move. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tears began to well in her big brown eyes. Grace took a deep breath, whispering under her breath, "It's okay, baby. Just tell the truth." The judge encouraged her again. "Take your time, sweetheart." Emily looked up at her father, then at Grace. Her tiny hands shook. She looked like she was carrying a secret too heavy for a child. I don't want anyone to get in trouble," she finally said in a broken voice. Richard's face hardened. "Emily, just tell them what you told me," he said sternly. The judge frowned at his tone. "Mr. Blake, let her speak freely." Emily swallowed hard, her tears falling now. "But, Daddy, Grace didn't—" She stopped mid-sentence as Richard shot her a warning look. Grace's breath caught. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. The judge leaned forward. "Didn't what, Emily?" he asked gently. The little girl's lips quivered as the courtroom held its breath. Everyone waited. The reporters, the jury, even the billionaire himself. and just as she opened her mouth to speak, the scene faded to silence. The camera would cut here in your YouTube video, with tension high, emotions raw, leaving the audience desperate to know what Emily would say next. Before the flashing cameras and angry accusations, before the courtroom whispers and broken trust, there was just Grace Carter, a simple woman with calloused hands, tired eyes, and the softest heart you could ever find. Grace was born and raised in a small, sunburned town in Georgia, where life was slow and dreams were small. Her mother always said, "Grace, we may not have much, but we have dignity. Never let the world take that from you." Those words stayed with her long after her mother passed away. When her husband died in a car accident 5 years ago, Grace's world shattered into silence. She was left with her little boy, Eli, who was only 4 at the time. The nights were long, the bills were endless, and hope. Hope was something she had to force herself to hold on to. She cleaned houses during the day, washed dishes at a local diner at night, and prayed every morning for strength to do it all over again. Life didn't give her much, but Grace gave everything she had. Then one afternoon, while scrubbing the floor of a cafe, she overheard 2 women talking. "The Blake family's looking for a new maid. They pay well. But it's in the city, big house, strict rules." Grace froze mid-scrub. The Blakes. Everyone in the state knew that name. Billionaires, real estate tycoons. People who lived behind gates taller than trees. That night she whispered a prayer. "Lord, if this is your way of helping me take care of Eli, please let them see my heart." The next week she took the long bus ride to New York City, with her only decent dress and a folder of references clutched tightly in her hands. The mansion stood like a palace, guarded by stone lions and surrounded by roses that smelled richer than anything she'd ever known. When Richard Blake opened the door, he didn't smile. He looked at her like he was studying a resume, not a person. "You have experience?" he asked curtly. "Yes, sir," Grace said softly. "I've worked for families, cleaned, cooked, cared for children." He nodded, uninterested, and waved her inside. "You'll work 6 days a week. My daughter Emily is 7. Keep her company when I'm away. Don't be late. Don't make noise. And don't break anything." His voice carried power, the kind that came from years of being obeyed. Grace just nodded, grateful even for the cold tone. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." From that day, her life changed. The mansion was enormous, a world of glass and gold. Chandeliers like stars hung from the ceiling. But it wasn't the wealth that amazed Grace. It was the silence. A silence that felt lonely. And in that silence, she met Emily. The little girl peeked out from behind the staircase the first day Grace arrived. She had soft brown curls and sad blue eyes that looked older than her age. "Hi," Emily whispered. "Are you my new nanny?" Grace smiled warmly. "Something like that, sweetheart. You can call me Miss Grace." From that day forward, something beautiful began. Grace became more than a maid. She became Emily's safe place. She brushed her hair before school, packed her favorite lunch, and tucked her into bed at night with gentle stories about angels and fireflies. They baked cookies together, painted flowers on old napkins, and even made silly faces in the mirror when no one was watching. "Miss Grace," Emily once asked, "why do you always smile even when you're tired?" Grace chuckled softly. "Because, baby girl, smiling is how we tell the world it didn't break us." Emily giggled, hugging her tight. "You're the best." But behind those walls, not everything was golden. Richard Blake was a man who measured everything in profit and loss. After his wife Amelia passed away from cancer, he drowned himself in work. His mansion was always full of guests, but empty of love. Emily barely saw him except at dinner, where he scrolled through his phone while she picked at her food. Many nights Grace would find Emily crying alone in her room, holding her mother's picture. She'd sit beside her, rubbing her back. "Your mama's watching you from heaven," Grace whispered, "and she's proud of you every single day." Emily would sniffle and smile weakly. "I wish Daddy would talk to me like you do." Grace's heart ached, but she never spoke badly of Richard. Instead, she said softly, "He loves you, baby." Some people just forget how to show it. Over time, the bond between Grace and Emily became unbreakable. The mansion might have belonged to Richard, but the warmth inside it belonged to Grace. Until that one stormy night, the night that would change everything. Rain hammered against the mansion's tall windows. Thunder cracked like angry drums in the sky. Grace was finishing dishes when she heard it. A sharp scream from upstairs. "Emily?" she called, dropping the towel. No answer. Her heart raced as she ran up the grand staircase. She turned the corner and froze. Emily was on the floor crying, clutching her arm. The bruise was already forming. Grace knelt down, panic flooding her. "Oh, my Lord!" "What happened, baby?" She reached out, gently holding Emily's small hand. The little girl's lips trembled. Daddy yelled at me. I broke Mommy's picture." Before Grace could ask more, she heard footsteps. Heavy, angry. Richard appeared at the door, eyes blazing. He saw Emily's arm, then saw Grace kneeling beside her, and in that single moment his grief twisted into rage. The thunder rolled across the city like a warning from the heavens. The mansion's tall windows shook under the force of the storm. Lightning flashed, turning the marble halls into cold silver for a split second before darkness swallowed them again. Grace's heart pounded as she held little Emily's trembling body. The bruise on the child's arm was forming fast, purple and angry under the skin. Grace's fingers shook as she tried to comfort her. "Oh, sweetheart, you're okay. You're okay," she whispered, brushing wet hair off Emily's forehead. "Tell me what happened. Did you fall?" Emily's eyes darted toward the doorway. She sniffled, voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy was yelling. I broke Mommy's picture. I didn't mean to." Her words cracked into sobs. Grace's heart softened instantly. "Shh, baby, it's okay. Accidents happen." She pulled the girl into her arms. "You didn't mean it." "Nobody's going to be mad." But before Grace could say another word, the echo of footsteps filled the hallway, fast, hard, and full of fury. Richard Blake appeared at the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his face twisted with anger. His eyes scanned the scene, the broken glass frame, the crying child, and Grace kneeling beside her. "What did you do to my daughter?" he shouted, his voice booming through the mansion. Grace froze. "Sir, I didn't." He didn't let her finish. "Emily, did she hurt you?" Emily shook her head, but her father wasn't listening. He rushed forward, pulling the girl from Grace's arms. "Don't touch her," he barked, glaring at Grace like she was poison. Grace stood up quickly, hands trembling. "Mr. Blake, please, she fell." She was scared. She said she... "Liar," he roared, his face red with rage. "You think I'm a fool? I trusted you with my child, and you..." He stopped, looking down at Emily's bruised arm. "God, look at this! What kind of monster are you?" Tears streamed down Grace's face. "Sir, I swear on my son's life I didn't hurt her. I love Emily. I would never." But Richard wasn't listening. His pain had already chosen someone to blame. The house that once echoed with Emily's laughter now shook with the sound of her father's fury. Emily tried to speak, her small voice trembling. "Daddy, she didn't..." "Enough," Richard snapped. "Go to your room, Emily. But now." The little girl flinched and ran upstairs, crying, clutching her teddy bear tight. The sound of her sobs faded into the storm outside. Grace stood still, her heart breaking. "Sir, please listen to me." She was already hurt when I came in. "I called the doctor because..." "Save your lies for the police," Richard interrupted coldly. He pulled out his phone and dialed with shaking hands. "I'm reporting an assault. A maid has attacked my daughter." Grace felt her knees weaken. "Police, sir, please." "Don't do this. You know me. You've seen me take care of her every day." But his eyes were like stone. "I've seen enough." Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed through the rain. The front gate swung open as 2 police cars pulled in. Neighbors peeked through their windows, watching the chaos unfold at the mansion of one of New York's richest men. Grace stood on the front steps, soaked to the bone, her hands shaking as officers questioned her. One of them, a kind-faced woman, looked at Grace sympathetically. "Ma'am, we just need to ask a few questions. Mr. Blake says the child was assaulted under your care." Grace's lips trembled. "Assaulted? I'd never hurt her. She's like family to me." But Richard's words carried more weight than hers ever could. He stood behind the officers, his tone cold and commanding. "I want her out of my house now." As they led Grace to the patrol car, she turned one last time. Through the rain-smeared window on the 2nd floor, she saw Emily standing there, her face pale, eyes filled with guilt and fear. "Emily!" Grace cried out, her voice breaking. "It's okay, baby." "Don't cry! Tell them the truth!" But the wind drowned her words. The car door slammed shut, and Grace's reflection blurred in the glass. A woman who had given everything, now being taken away like a criminal. Inside the mansion, Richard stood motionless in the hallway, staring at the shattered picture frame of his late wife. His reflection stared back from the broken glass, angry, empty, and lost. He didn't see the small note tucked behind the frame, a faded photograph of Emily and Grace smiling in the garden, holding hands. A photo Emily had hidden there because it made her feel safe. But that night, safety was gone. That night, innocence broke. And as the police car disappeared down the long driveway, Emily whispered through her tears, "Daddy." She didn't do it. But it was too late. The world had already decided who was guilty. The morning of the trial was cold and grey, the kind of day when the sky looked like stone and the wind whispered judgment. Grace sat quietly in the back of the police van, hands cuffed, staring at the tiny window streaked with rain. Every bump on the road made her heart sink lower. She had never been inside a courtroom before, never imagined she'd see her name written on a case file marked child assault. Her heart broke again and again with each passing second, not for herself, but for Emily. That little girl's smile had been the light of her world, and now that same world saw her as a monster. When the van stopped, Grace was led inside through the back entrance. Cameras flashed the moment she stepped out. Reporters shouted questions. "Grace, did you hit the billionaire's daughter? Why would you hurt a child? Are you guilty?" Grace didn't respond. Her voice had been stolen by fear. Inside the courtroom, whispers buzzed like bees. The audience filled every seat, curious faces, judgmental eyes. Some pitied her, others stared with disgust. At the front sat Richard Blake, his expensive suit perfect, his posture straight. The power and wealth surrounding him made him look untouchable. His daughter Emily sat beside him, smaller than ever, eyes downcast, clutching her teddy bear as if it were the only safe thing left in the world. The judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff commanded. Everyone stood. Grace's knees trembled. When the session began, the prosecutor wasted no time. He was young, ambitious, and hungry for headlines. He walked across the courtroom with an air of confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we see the dark side of trust. A man opened his home to a maid, a woman he treated like family. And how did she repay him? By abusing the one person he loves most, his little girl." He paused, letting his words hang heavy in the air. "This case is simple. The child was bruised. The only adult present was the maid. There are no other suspects. This was no accident. This was cruelty." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras clicked. Grace looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. Her lawyer, Sarah Miller, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't lose hope," she whispered. "Truth always has a way of shining through, even when it's buried deep." When the prosecutor presented the photos, the room fell silent. The image of Emily's bruised arm filled the courtroom screen. A small, innocent arm covered in purple marks. Richard clenched his jaw, looking away. Grace sobbed quietly, shaking her head. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "the child deserves justice. The evidence is clear." When it was Sarah's turn, she stood tall, her voice calm but strong. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, "the truth is not always what it seems. My client, Grace Carter, has no criminal record. She is a mother, a widow, and a woman known for her kindness. She has cared for Emily Blake like her own daughter for 3 years. There has never been a complaint, never a sign of violence." She paced slowly, her eyes on the jurors. "We live in a world where power can twist perception. But love tells the truth. And I ask you all to remember that." The judge nodded slightly. "Noted. Let's proceed with witness testimony." The prosecutor called his first witness, Richard Blake. He walked to the stand with authority. "Mr. Blake," the prosecutor said, "please tell the court what you saw." Richard took a deep breath. "I came home that night and found my daughter crying. She had bruises on her arm. Grace was standing right there. I didn't see her hurt Emily, but who else could it have been? She was the only adult there. The prosecutor nodded. So you're certain she's responsible? Richard's voice hardened. Absolutely. Grace's lawyer rose. Mr. Blake, did you ask your daughter what happened before calling the police? Richard hesitated. She was scared. I didn't want to pressure her. Sarah's voice grew softer. Sometimes fear makes children quiet, sir. Sometimes truth needs patience. Richard frowned but said nothing. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Your Honor, Sarah said, we would like to hear from the child, Miss Emily Blake. The judge nodded. Bring the child forward. Emily's tiny footsteps echoed through the courtroom as she approached the witness stand. Her teddy bear hung from her hand, worn and loved. The bailiff helped her up onto the chair. Sweetheart, the judge said kindly, do you understand what it means to tell the truth? Emily nodded. Yes, sir. Good girl, the judge said gently. Now can you tell us what happened the night you got hurt? The room went silent. Not even the clicking of cameras. Emily stared at her teddy bear. Her lips trembled. She glanced at her father, his expression sharp, expectant. Then she looked at Grace, whose tear-filled eyes pleaded silently, Tell them, baby. Just tell them the truth. Emily took a shaky breath. I didn't want her to get in trouble. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Richard's eyes widened. What do you mean? The judge leaned forward. Go on, Emily, you can speak freely here. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She clutched her teddy bear tighter, and with a trembling voice, she said words that made the entire courtroom freeze. Grace didn't hurt me. The courtroom froze. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved, no one even breathed. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Grace didn't hurt me. The judge blinked. Excuse me, sweetheart. Can you say that again? Emily swallowed hard, tears glistening in her wide blue eyes. Grace didn't hurt me, she repeated, her small voice trembling but clear this time. She never hurt me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned forward. The prosecutor's confident smile vanished. Even the bailiff turned slightly, eyes wide with disbelief. Grace gasped softly, her hands covering her mouth. Oh, Lord, she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. The judge's tone softened. Emily, tell us what really happened that night. The little girl wiped her tears with her sleeve. She looked down at her teddy bear, stroking its worn fur like it could give her courage. Then she took a deep breath. It was raining really bad, Emily began, her voice shaking. Daddy came home late. I was waiting for him in Mommy's room because I broke her picture frame. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Even the sound of the rain outside had faded, as if the world itself paused to hear her. I didn't mean to break it, Emily continued. It just fell when I was dusting it. I know Daddy loves that picture. It was the last one he took with Mommy before she died. Richard's head slowly lifted. His face, usually so composed, was pale and unreadable. I tried to fix it, Emily said, her voice cracking. But when Daddy came in and saw it broken, he got really mad. He yelled, and I got scared. I ran. I slipped and hit my arm on the table. Gasps echoed through the room. She looked toward Grace, tears spilling freely now. When Grace came, she hugged me and called the doctor. She said everything would be okay. But when Daddy saw my arm, he thought she did it. Grace began to cry, covering her face as sobs escaped her. Her lawyer, Sarah, gently touched her shoulder, her own eyes wet. The prosecutor's voice broke the silence, though it sounded weaker now. Emily, are you saying you lied before? The little girl nodded, guilt heavy in her small face. Daddy kept asking who did it. He looked so angry. I didn't know what to say. I was scared. I didn't want him to be mad anymore. So I didn't say anything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I thought if I stayed quiet, he'd calm down. I didn't know it would hurt Grace. Richard buried his face in his hands. A low murmur rose from the crowd again. Shock, disbelief, shame. The judge's voice was calm but firm. Mr. Blake, do you wish to respond to your daughter's statement? Richard looked up, his eyes red, his composure gone. I didn't know, he said weakly. I thought she... His voice cracked. I thought Grace... He couldn't finish. Sarah stood. Your Honor, I think it's clear what happened. Grace Carter is not a criminal. She's a caregiver who became a victim of misunderstanding. and of power. The judge nodded solemnly. This court recognizes that the accusation was based on a misinterpretation and false assumption. The charges against Mrs. Carter are dismissed immediately. The gavel hit the desk with a loud bang, and just like that, Grace was free. But there was no celebration in her heart. She didn't jump for joy, didn't shout or smile. Instead, she turned to Emily, her eyes overflowing with love and relief. The little girl ran across the courtroom and threw her arms around Grace. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she cried, her tiny body shaking. Grace held her close, pressing her cheek to Emily's hair. "Shh, baby, it's okay. You did the right thing. That's all that matters." The judge's eyes softened. Even the bailiff turned away to wipe a tear. Across the room, Richard stood frozen, watching them. Every word his daughter spoke had hit him harder than any courtroom verdict could. He saw now what his anger had done, how his pride had blinded him. He had accused the one person who had shown his daughter the love he'd failed to give. He walked slowly toward them, his steps hesitant, the weight of guilt heavy on his shoulders. Grace looked up, unsure. Richard stopped a few feet away. For the first time in years, his voice trembled. "Grace." She waited, silent. I'm so sorry," he managed. "I let my anger make me cruel. I should have trusted you. You were the only one who ever truly cared for Emily." Grace didn't speak for a moment. The courtroom watched as the billionaire, once powerful and proud, stood there looking utterly broken. Finally, she nodded gently. "I forgive you, sir," she said softly. "We all make mistakes. But thank God the truth doesn't stay buried forever." Tears filled Richard's eyes. He knelt beside Emily, pulling her into his arms. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," the child cried into his chest. Grace watched quietly, her heart full of pain, of love, of relief. As the crowd began to disperse, a reporter whispered, "The maid who was accused saved them both." And she had. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just free the innocent, it saves the guilty too. The courtroom had emptied hours ago. Reporters had long since chased their headlines, camera lights had dimmed, and the once buzzing room now stood in quiet stillness. But Richard Blake hadn't moved. He sat on the same wooden bench where he had stood tall and proud that morning, the same bench where he had watched Grace, the woman he accused, break down in tears as his daughter spoke the truth. Now, the billionaire looked nothing like the man the world knew. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie hung loose, and his eyes, once sharp and cold, were red, tired, and full of regret. The echo of Emily's voice still haunted him. "Grace didn't hurt me." It repeated again and again, until it didn't sound like words anymore. It sounded like judgment. He had spent years building empires, buying silence, controlling narratives. But in that one afternoon, a single truth from the mouth of a child had shattered everything. Richard ran a hand over his face and whispered, "What have I done?" He remembered Grace's face when the verdict was announced. Not angry, not vengeful, just heartbroken. He had taken her dignity, her name, her peace, all because he couldn't control his own rage. "Sir?" A gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the janitor, a quiet old man who worked nights at the courthouse. "They're closing up soon. You all right?" Richard nodded faintly. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I am." That night he didn't go home to his mansion. Instead, he drove through the pouring rain until he reached the small neighborhood where Grace lived. It was nothing like the world he came from. Narrow streets, flickering streetlights, kids' bicycles lying in front of tiny porches. He parked his sleek black car outside a modest brick house and sat there for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding. He'd come to apologize, but how do you apologize for destroying someone's life? Finally, he stepped out and walked up the path. Rain soaked through his clothes as he knocked on the door. Grace opened it after a moment. She froze when she saw him, her face unreadable, eyes wary but calm. "Mr. Blake," she said quietly. "Why are you here?" He didn't know what to say. For the first time in his life, words failed him. "I needed to see you," he stammered. "I don't expect forgiveness, Grace. I need to tell you I'm sorry." She studied him for a moment. The man who once towered over everyone now looked small, trembling, broken. "Come in," she said softly. Inside, the house smelled of warm tea and comfort, a scent that instantly made him feel out of place. There were pictures of Grace's family on the wall, her late husband, her son, and even a photo of little Emily smiling beside her. That sight alone brought tears to Richard's eyes. "I saw the news," Grace said quietly, handing him a towel. "They'll be writing about it for weeks." "I deserve it," he admitted, his voice thick. "I accused you. I ruined your name. I made everyone believe you were a monster. And you were the only one who loved my daughter the way I couldn't." Grace sat across from him, silent, listening. "I was angry," he continued, choking on his words. "Angry at the world, at losing my wife, at being left alone. When I saw Emily hurt, I needed someone to blame. I didn't even look for the truth." His voice cracked. "So you were right there, and it was easy. Too easy to blame you." Grace looked at him, her eyes softening with empathy. "Pain makes us do terrible things, Mr. Blake, but that pain doesn't have to own us." Richard looked up, startled. "You're not angry?" "Angry?" she repeated. "Of course I was. But anger doesn't heal anything. Forgiveness does. And Emily, she still needs her father." He lowered his head, tears streaming freely now. "You're a better person than I'll ever be." Grace shook her head. "No, sir. I'm just someone who believes people can change. Even you." At that moment, Emily came out from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "Daddy?" she whispered, unsure. Richard turned toward her, his heart twisting. "Hey, sweetheart." She hesitated, then ran into his arms. He hugged her tightly, tears falling onto her hair. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "For everything." Grace stood there quietly, a faint smile on her face. The pain wasn't gone, but something new had taken its place. Healing. As Richard left later that night, he paused at the door. "Grace," he said softly, "I don't know how to repay you." "You already did," she replied with a gentle smile. "For you listened." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Maybe I can do more than that." As he walked away into the rain, he felt lighter than he had in years. For the first time, the billionaire who once owned everything realized that true wealth isn't money, it's mercy. The morning after that long, sleepless night, Richard Blake woke to the sound of rain again. But this time, it didn't sound like judgment, it sounded like cleansing. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up to phone calls, business alerts, or his assistant's urgent reminders. He sat on the edge of his bed, looking around his enormous mansion, and realized how empty it felt. The silence was deafening. He'd spent decades chasing success, building an empire so vast that his name appeared on skyscrapers, magazines, and charity galas. Yet none of it could buy him the thing he now craved most: peace. He glanced at a framed photo on his desk. It was of his late wife, smiling, holding baby Emily in her arms. Her eyes had always carried warmth, the same warmth he'd seen in Grace. He whispered, "I let you down. Sarah, I almost destroyed the best person who ever loved our daughter." And that's when he made a decision. Money had been his weapon for too long. Now it would become his way to make things right. The next day, Richard walked into his corporate headquarters, but this time, not as the cold, commanding CEO everyone feared. His employees stared in shock as he called an emergency meeting. "Effective immediately," he announced, "Blake Enterprises will launch a new foundation dedicated to supporting underpaid domestic workers, caregivers, and single mothers. We'll call it the Grace Foundation." There was a stunned silence. One of the executives raised a hesitant hand. "Sir, if I may, are you sure that's a good idea given the recent publicity?" Richard looked him straight in the eye. "Exactly because of the publicity," he said. "People need to see the truth. They need to see that change is possible. And I owe it to Grace Assam and to my daughter to prove it." That day, headlines across the city read, "Billionaire creates foundation in honor of woman he wrongly accused." Some called it an act of redemption. Others said it was damage control. But Grace didn't care about the noise. She saw something different when she watched the press conference on TV. She saw a man who had finally found humility. A week later, Richard visited the small community center where Grace volunteered on weekends. Children ran around with laughter echoing in the halls, their joy filling the air. Grace was helping a young mother fill out a job form when she noticed him standing at the door. "Mr. Blake," she greeted, with that calm tone that always carried dignity. He smiled faintly. "Just Richard, please." She nodded, setting down her pen. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did," he replied. "I'm not here to fix everything with money. I just wanted to help." He looked around at the faded walls and the broken playground outside. "You've been doing God's work here with nothing. Let me at least give you the tools." Grace smiled softly. "This place doesn't need money as much as it needs people who care." Richard nodded, eyes glistening. "Then that's what I'll give." Over the next few weeks he began showing up, quietly, without cameras, without suits. He painted walls. He repaired swings. He delivered groceries. At first no one believed it was really him. The billionaire who once lived behind golden gates now stood in sweatpants and old sneakers, fixing leaky roofs and serving meals. But he didn't care what anyone thought, because every time he looked at Emily, laughing with Grace's grandkids, running barefoot through the grass, he saw the life he almost ruined. Grace often watched him from afar, her heart softening each day. Not because he was rich, but because he was finally real. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Grace approached him at the playground. "You've changed," she said quietly. Richard smiled, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I think I finally understand something," he said. "Forgiveness isn't about saying sorry once. It's about living in a way that proves you mean it." Grace nodded, her eyes warm. "And you're doing just that." He looked out at Emily, swinging on the swings, her laughter filling the air. "She's happy again," he whispered. "That's worth more than everything I own." Grace smiled. "Then maybe, Mr. Blake, you've finally become rich in the way that matters most." Richard chuckled softly. "You know, I used to think I owned the world. Now I just want to be worthy of the people in mine." The two stood there in silence, watching the children play. In that golden hour, something beautiful had happened. Two souls from completely different worlds had found peace in the same place. Because forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it redeems the future. And Richard Blake, the billionaire who once thought money could buy anything, finally understood the priceless gift Grace had given him, a second chance. Years passed. The seasons changed, the city evolved, and the story of the billionaire and the maid faded from the headlines, but not from the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Richard Blake was no longer the same man who once ruled boardrooms with an iron voice. He had stepped away from the spotlight, resigned from his empire, and turned his energy towards something far more meaningful: the Grace Foundation. What started as an act of redemption had grown into a movement. The foundation now provided housing, education, and healthcare support for thousands of domestic workers and single parents across the country. And every year, on the anniversary of that fateful court day, Richard would visit the community center, the same one where he had first learned what real wealth looked like. He no longer arrived in black cars or with reporters. He came quietly, walking with a soft smile, often carrying bags of books or toys for the children. The kids didn't know who he was. To them, he was just Mr. Richard, the kind old man who fixed their swings and read them stories about hope. But Grace knew. Now older, her hair touched with gray, Grace still volunteered at the center every weekend. Her warmth filled every room she entered. And though time had lined her face, her spirit was as strong as ever, gentle, wise, and radiant. One sunny afternoon, Emily returned from college. She was no longer the scared little girl who once hid behind her father's anger. She had grown into a confident young woman, studying psychology, hoping to one day help children who faced fear and trauma. Just as she once did, she walked into the center, her heart full as she saw Grace surrounded by children. The laughter, the smiles, and it felt like home. "Miss Grace," she called. Grace turned, her eyes lighting up. "Oh, Emily." They hugged tightly, tears brimming in both their eyes. "Look at you," Grace smiled, all grown up. "Your mama would be proud." Emily laughed softly. "So would you," she said. "So you taught me what kindness really means." Just then, Richard walked in, holding a box of toys. He stopped for a moment, seeing the two women who had changed his life standing side by side. For a brief second, emotion caught in his throat. "Hey, my girls," he said softly, setting the box down. Grace smiled. "You're late, Mr. Richard," he chuckled. "You know me, still learning to follow instructions." The three of them sat together as the children played in the background. The light from the windows painted everything in gold. It felt peaceful, like life had come full circle. Later that day, as the sun began to set, Richard and Emily walked through the playground. The laughter of children echoed behind them. "Dad," Emily said softly, "do you ever think about that day?" "In court?" He nodded slowly. "Every day." "Does it still hurt?" He smiled faintly. "It hurts in a good way," he said, "because it reminds me of who I used to be, and who I never want to be again." Emily looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He smiled, not the confident public smile people once saw on magazine covers, but a real human one. "I'm proud of us, sweetheart. We didn't let hate win." They stopped near the old oak tree where Richard had helped rebuild the playground years ago. He looked out at the setting sun, its golden glow reflecting in his tired eyes. "You know," he said softly, "people spend their lives chasing money, thinking it'll fill the emptiness inside them. But when I lost everything, my reputation, my pride, that's when I finally found peace." He glanced toward Grace, who was helping a child tie his shoe. "That woman, she showed me what real strength looks like. And it didn't come from power or wealth. It came from forgiveness." Emily smiled through her tears. "You think she knows how much she changed us?" "Oh, she knows," Richard whispered. "But I don't think she ever did it for thanks. That's just who she is." As night fell, the community center's lights glowed warmly. The children waved goodbye, their laughter fading into the cool air. Grace stood by the door, watching them leave with that same peaceful smile. "Good night." "Mr. Richard," she called out. "Good night." "Grace," he replied. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the children, the joy, the warmth that radiated from the very place where his redemption had begun. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Because of you, Grace, I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's power, the kind that changes hearts." Grace looked at him, her eyes shining with compassion. "And that's the kind of wealth that never fades." He smiled, nodding slowly. Years later, when Richard Blake passed away peacefully, the newspapers didn't headline his billions or his business empire. They spoke of the Grace Foundation. They spoke of the lives he touched, the children he helped, and the lesson he left behind. And on the wall of the community center, just below a photo of Grace and Emily smiling, there hung a simple plaque with his final words engraved. "True riches are not measured in money, but in mercy." And so the story that began with anger ended in grace, because sometimes the ones we wrong the most become the ones who teach us how to love again.